the SmallmouthCrush podcast. If you're a hardcore angler, you've come to the right place. This is a weekly podcast that will interview some of the top smallmouth bass anglers in North America. Travis and his guest will discuss what it takes to consistently catch big smallmouth, and you'll get a glimpse inside the mind of a trophy smallmouth angler. And now, here's your host of the SmallmouthCrush podcast, Travis Manson.
Hello and welcome to the SmallmouthCrush podcast. My name is Travis Manson. Another great episode for everybody out there. Man, we've been learning a lot talking to the top 52 smallmouth bass anglers across the country, guys that know how to catch fish on a consistent basis and catch some of those big smallmouth that we all love to chase. Ryan Said's going to be joining us here in a moment. But first, I would like to give a shout out to the Reel Shot. Reel Shot's becoming one of the largest online tackle stores out there. It's got everything you need if you're a SmallmouthCrush fan. They carry all the most wanted brands: Mega Bass, Jackal, Evergreen, Z-Man, Daiwa, Shimano, St. Croix rods, Kitech, Dirty Jigs, pretty much everything, as well as the standards: VMC, Rapala, Berkeley. Their easy-to-shop website will help selecting the exact product you need. Super, super easy. Same-day delivery. So we're going to make sure we get those purchases in your tackle box before your next big bass adventure. Feel free to use my code, SmallmouthCrush15. So head on over to thereelshot.com, SmallmouthCrush15. We're going to give you 15% off your first order. So pretty cool deal there. Really appreciate the Reel Shot for their support with this podcast. And without further ado, and just like that, he pops in the screen. Ryan, how are you doing?
Doing great.
Awesome, man. Well, I'm really excited to have you on this show. I mean, you're no stranger to big smallmouth. You got a lot of experience when it comes to chasing smallmouth. And I really want to dig into, some of the key techniques that you use on a regular basis. But before we get into that, could you just introduce yourself real quick to the viewers and listeners on this show? Give us a little bit of background about yourself, and let's get into the smallmouth talk.
Yeah, sure. So I've been bass fishing since I was about 8, probably about 15 or 16, probably back in the mid 90s. Caught my first bass and was kind of hooked from there. My dad had always taken me fishing, but I caught that first bass and it was downhill from there. So I've been bass fishing for a long time. Just turned 40 recently, so don't feel like 40, but I am. So I've been fishing for a long time. Mid 2000s or so, I started fishing a lot of the like the Everstart trails back then. The semi-pro leagues and Bassmaster Opens. Travis and I would both fish the Bassmaster Opens in 2010. Both qualified for the Elite Series that year. It was pretty cool. Made the Classic that year. I fished the Elite Series for 1 year. Things didn't quite work out from a financial perspective, so just the way things go sometimes. Made the decision to not pursue a second year. They did invite us back, but just financial things, what they are. It's a really expensive sport. Made the decision to not pursue a second year. But I continue to fish a lot of the open tournaments that are around in my area now. About a year or two went by. I decided to go back to school to get my teaching degree. And that freed up my summers. I had been an engineer before that. Got my teaching degree. I teach high school now, and I guide on Lake St. Clair and Lake Erie, which are both about 30 to 40 minutes from the house. I guide on the spring and the fall on the weekends, and then I guide all summer long, 5, 6, sometimes 7 days a week all summer long. Lake Erie, mostly Lake St. Clair, but we do some Lake Erie too. I do some of the inland lakes. I try to run some guide trips specifically for high schoolers, some instructional trips that I try to run for them. A little bit cheaper, teach them the basics of tournament fishing and that. I coach a college team, Lawrence Tech University, their college fishing team. So speak at some seminars, done some other podcasts. So I enjoy being part of the industry. Love tournament fishing still. Don't get to do it near as much as I'd like to, but hopefully get back to that some. Most of my time spent guiding right now in Lake St. Clair, which is, I'm sure we'll talk about it, one of the best places in the world to be a guide. So.
Sure. It certainly is. So I didn't know this. So you were an engineer and then qualified for the Bassmaster Elite Series. And after that, you went back to get your teaching.
Yeah. So I had a really cool boss, and he let me have a lot of time off to fish tournaments at Chrysler is where I worked. I was a contract worker there, so I was able to take a little bit more time off unpaid than a direct employee there. And that's when I was fishing, like I said, the Ever Starts, Bassmaster Opens, qualified. And then after that didn't work out, that's when I decided to go try a different route for a little bit and try the teaching thing. And so that's where I'm at now.
Cool. So did you purposely decide to become a teacher so you could get your summers off and fish? Because that's what
I won't say that's 100% why I did it, but it was definitely part of it in the pie chart of reasons of why I did that. Right. It was definitely a slice of that pie chart. I had thought about teaching for a long time. I had actually looked into it a couple of years prior to that, prior to making that move, but I really wanted to pursue fishing. And as you know, fishing is incredibly expensive. And engineering was paying for it. And at the time, like I said, I had a real good boss that was letting me have the time I needed. So it just made sense to stay with it at that point. But once the Elite Series didn't work out, I just wanted to try something new with my direction. So that's why I made that move there.
Sure. So a lot of fish and guiding right now, St. Clair. You mentioned Lake Erie still, and in some inland lakes. I definitely want to touch on all of that because you're living in one of the best parts of the country, to smallmouth fish. Obviously, it's well known, worldwide, and the amount of fish that smallmouth, especially that live in that region, is just, it blows my mind. It's just a fish factory. The guiding, how long have you been guiding?
So think about it. This will be year 7 that I've been guiding. Friend of mine, Marcel Veenstra, he runs a guide service and he guides full time. He works at a marina in the off season too, but probably like I said, about 7 years ago or so, he was guiding and he started his own guiding business, and he's been a friend of mine for a long time. I actually met him back in early 2000s at a Bassmaster tournament. And he started a guiding business, and he said, hey, I need some help. Can you want to get your license? We can make some money. And so I got my captain's license, and it's been about 7 years now that I've been guiding, and I really enjoy it. I really do enjoy it. It's a great way to meet people. And I can count on maybe 3 or 4 fingers the number of bad clients that I've had. People are looking for a good time, and this place delivers up here. So.
Yes, it certainly does. It's real interesting, the fact that you're able to still pursue, a career in the industry after leaving the Bassmaster Elite Series and now fishing, as a guide. Do you have any drive to get back, or do you fish higher level tournaments now or local events?
I definitely do. I do fish local tournaments. I do fish local. Obviously, right now the guiding kind of takes priority there. Clients book ahead of time, they want certain dates, and so I have to give them. But if I'm open on a weekend and there's a good tournament going on, I usually jump in. I got a couple buddies that I like to fish tournaments with. I definitely have some drive to get back there. I got married a couple years ago. We got a house now. We just got a dog this year, so kind of doing that thing, trying to get that squared away as far from a financial perspective. But I definitely do have ambition to at least get back to more consistently fishing the opens. There's no opens coming to this region this year. So if they did, I would try to get into them if the timing was right, as far as guiding and stuff like that. But I definitely have that drive to get back and fish at least the opens, if not try to get back to a higher level. It's a tough gig, and it it was expensive when we were doing it trying to do it back in 2011, 2012 and that. And it is unfortunately only gotten more expensive. And as you know, the dollars aren't there. So it's a really tough gig. But I definitely have at least the tournament fishing drive to make it happen. So
sure, right. Now you mentioned you're only less than an hour drive to Lake Erie, to St. Clair, and of course some of the inland bodies of water. If you had a choice, where let's say you got a free day to go out fishing, where are you heading? Where are you launching the boat?
So I'm partial to Lake Erie. Right now, I will tell you, Lake St. Clair is a far better fishery than Lake Erie right now for whatever reason. It goes back and forth. It cycles up and down. Back when I qualified for the elites in 2010, Erie was a better place to be. We fished an open on Erie that year. And the guy that won was on St. Clair, but all like 8 of the 10 were on Erie. Right. So, but for whatever reason that has kind of changed around. I'm not 100% sure why. But I prefer Lake Erie myself just because of the way it sets up. Lake St. Clair is a lot of fun. It's an easy place to guide, but the fishing is not as precise, and it's something that I enjoy, the precision of Lake Erie, the rock piles, the breaks, the edges. I like using my graph. I like throwing at specific things, whereas Lake St. Clair is just kind of throw it out there, and it doesn't matter which my clients will get in the boat. My clients are like, where should I throw? I'm like, throw it wherever you want, you know? So whereas Lake Erie has a little more precision to it, and I prefer that.
Wow.
So that I prefer to fish Lake Erie, but you know, you can't beat a day on Lake St. Clair either.
Right. No, that's interesting. It sounds like, you know, Erie, as far as time on the water and, you know, discovering whether it be, you know, little pieces of structure that these fish hold on, and then you can, you know, hopefully count on having those fish stick around, or, you know, utilize that spot throughout the year. Where Lake Erie, you know, we hear this a lot with people that fish there. Those fish move so much, you know. There's obviously some structure here and there. There's some stuff that they will stick on, but I'm assuming, and I don't have as much experience on Lake St. Clair as you do, but those fish on St. Clair, they're always roaming. Is that correct? Yeah.
I mean, I forget what, I think it was an episode of Mark Zona's show or something like that. He basically said Lake St. Clair is one big giant spawning flat. And that's one reason it's so good too, is because they really literally can spawn 90% of that lake they can spawn in. So there's really no, the deepest part of the lake other than the shipping channel is like 22 feet, you know? So, and then we know smallmouth spawn that deep all the time. So yeah, and that is the challenge of it, is pinning them down. There are places that they consistently seem to show up. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of structure. So what little structure there is, they do seem to show up on it, but it's also not that hard to find. So a lot of people know about it. The other stuff, my feeling on Lake St. Clair, I have areas where they seem to show up every year. And I can't tell you what's there. I have grafted, I don't know how many times. I've drove it left, right, up, down, north, south, and I can't tell you what's there. I suspect what it is somehow the current comes through that area in a certain way, the way the contours are there. But it is, they just roam. The bottom features are really subtle. There's areas on Lake St. Clair, you really need to drive about 25 to 30 miles an hour to really actually see anything, right? Lake Erie, you can go slow and see the structure. St. Clair, you got to drive about 20 or 30. You won't even notice any change on the bottom. All the change is from, like, say 10.1 to 10.6. You know, that's the change. And if you're going slow, you'll never see that. But
sure.
It's a lot of subtle stuff. It's a lot of just really paying attention to what's going on down there and what's happening. But there's also very cooperative fish, so that makes it nice from a guiding perspective. So
right. No, you brought up a really interesting point. What Ryan was referring to on places, and it's just not just St. Clair. You could be actually fishing the Great Lakes and have a similar area to the Great Lakes that's like that, where if you're idling, so, you know, we utilize our graphs a lot, and when you're going real slow, you're not going to see that 6-inch little lip or that rise. It's more of going and idling, or actually going on pad, creating a big wake and scanning. Is that kind of what and just looking for that little rise or that little transition in bottom on your graph? Yeah,
definitely. I don't know if you had a chance to watch the Bassmaster Elites last year on Lake St. Clair, where Clark Wendland was fishing. I had the privilege of going out with one of the Fishing Hall of Fame photographers, Steve Bowman. I drove him around for a couple of days. And then one of the areas where Clark Wendland was fishing, that's what we were talking about. If you drive it, we were driving around real slow, and he's looking at the bottom, and he's like, "What's here?" And I told him, I'm like, "You're not going to see it." But then I said, "Watch when we drive in." So we go to drive in, I put the boat on pad, and all of a sudden you can tell what's going on the bottom. And I don't even know so much that the fish are relating to those changes. Like I said, I think as much as the changes on the bottom is the way that the current moves around in those bottom areas too. So yeah, there's a lot of detail there that you really got to be paying attention to pick up on.
Mm-hmm. So Lake Erie obviously is a massive body of water.
Yeah.
There's certain, you know, it's kind of set up in different zones or regions, I would say. You know, where you're fishing, I would imagine you're launching a lot of times just south of the river, maybe in the river and making your way out. Is that correct?
Yeah. I've mostly just fished the western basin on Lake Erie. I've done a little bit in the central, and I really haven't been over on the eastern end of Lake Erie. But yeah, I launch out of Lake Erie Metro Park, which is right down there at the bottom of the Detroit River. So you're fishing. I do a lot of fishing in the mouth of the Detroit River, where the river, just into the river or just out of the river. It's a great place in the fall, especially when we start getting bad weather in the fall. It's a great place to go because it's a little more protected. But yeah, I'm mostly fishing the Western Basin out of southern Michigan there, and
Right.
Pelee Island or so.
Okay, so that's a poke. I mean, it's still a long drive by boat, even under
Yes.
normal conditions, to get out in that zone. So it's a massive area. It's interesting for people that are not familiar with that section of the lake. The Detroit River's got some massive current, and everything kind of dumps out on that end. And it's interesting. You mentioned the fall bite there. Is that pretty much just because those fish are starting to move in to feed, or they're just changing their seasonal patterns? What makes that area really, really good? In the later in the fall.
So there's for whatever reason, there's some kind of shad migration that generally happens. So the shad come out from out in the lake into the current laden areas. I don't know if there's like a fall shad spawn or depending on where the shad might winter, but there's definitely, you can pick it up on the graph. There's some kind of bait fish migration that happens. A lot of it is shad. I'm sure there's perch involved in that too. That happens where they kind of migrate out from the lake into more current laden areas in the mouth of the river. And like you said, there's a ton of current there. It can be 3, 4, 5 miles an hour in certain places. And the heavy current areas are usually pretty good especially if you can find some kind of break or dip or something like that. But there's some kind of bait fish migration that starts happening when the water starts cooling down a little bit. There's always fish there to be caught. If you look back at, I forget what they call them now, the Costa series. I think that's what they call them. But they actually kept one of those, the FLW Costa series. They kept them in the river. And it was before the major fall migration, but guys still caught fish, but there just seems to be something that happens a little bit more as it starts cooling down late September into October and even November. Guys, I think a team tournament this fall, they weighed in almost 50 pounds for 2 days out there. So it's something a little extra happens in the fall with the cooling weather.
Right on. That makes sense. What would you say your strength is when it comes to smallmouth fishing? Everyone seems to have, a few techniques, or whether it be how you locate fish. What do you think makes you so successful out there?
So I'd like to think it's attention to detail. Coming from an engineering background, and analytical mind in that, able to pick up on patterns and things like that pretty quick. The downside of that is that hurts me too, and I think honestly it hurt me some. As fishing the Elite Series the one year, is I'm not as good when you have to grind it out. When you've just got to go fishing by the seat of your pants. I'm very technical. I want to line up patterns. I look at history, I read data, I interpret things, and I try to make a this. I try to make it a math equation essentially. And when that equation works, I will figure it out better than most. But when it's not working, then I tend to struggle. So I feel like in the tournaments that I've done well, I've been able to pick something apart, even where other guys might be fishing, but I can figure out a little something extra to get that one extra bite, or make a little adjustment, or fish an adjacent area that looks the same, just something a little bit extra that I've been able to dial in some attention to detail, some detail of the pattern that I might have picked up on, that helps me to be a little bit more successful than others.
Sure. So it sounds like it's above and beyond just reading your graphs and going out looking, for structure. You're actually looking probably at past weights for if you're preparing for an event, whether it be those type of situations. I mean, to me, it just seems you got a lot going on in your head, and there's a lot of things that you'll lay out on the table before you even get out there. Is that accurate?
Definitely, yeah, and sometimes too much. Like I said, a lot of times your greatest strength can be your greatest weakness as well. So definitely, I keep especially from a guiding perspective, I keep a pretty detailed log. I have a whole Microsoft Excel spreadsheet where I have every day of the year listed, and I go through every year. And just it's not super detailed, but it's a brief description of the day. So I know, hey, I caught him here on this day, I caught him here on this day, because you lose track of that. You fish so much, you might lose track of things, but then that also helps you when you read that to pick up on patterns that maybe, you didn't really notice in year one when you made that entry, but now you've got 3 entries for that year at that time in a particular weather pattern. Oh, wait, now you can pick up something you didn't notice before, So yeah, there's a lot going on, sometimes too much, but most of the time it pays off for me.
That's great advice. I wish, I've been told to write things down for years when it comes to fishing, and I have not yet. Although I got a little bit of a video log, but there is something to being able to write down your day, write down the conditions that you faced, and you'll realize that you forgot a whole bunch of stuff that happened even the year before. That it's a good to refresh your memory, and hopefully kind of make that learning curve not so long. In today's world, there's so much information out there, and it's like kind of overwhelming for a lot of people that are starting out when it comes to fishing, and especially big water smallmouth. What's some advice based off of the logbooks that you've written down? Is there certain things that you start to notice over the years, whether it be we hear some people talk about moon phases and wind direction, things like that? Is there anything that jumps out of you?
Well, I'll give you one that's kind of that last couple of years I've been playing around with that seems to, nothing in fishing is 100%. It's a live animal down there, and you come on with these ideas and you think you figured it out, and then they prove you wrong. But percentage wise, one thing I've been playing with and kind of noticing is humidity, how much smallmouth seem to love humidity. You wake up in the morning, and when I walk out my door in the morning, I can feel that humidity from the night before. It didn't escape our atmosphere or whatever. We didn't have a lot of wind or whatever. I'm like, we're going to catch them today. Really? And I would say 80-90% of the time it seems to hold, and it's not that we don't catch them the other days, but it just seems like there's something about humidity that seems to, I think part of it is, I think the humidity triggers the food chain. I think that gets a lot of insects going. I notice in the mornings when it's more humid, there'll be more bugs on the surface and so on like that. So it's just something like, as a guide, you have to catch fish every day. It doesn't matter. But it's just a little thing that I've been noticing last 3, 4, 5 years, where it's like, man, humidity really plays a factor in what I can expect as far as what's going to happen today. Am I going to really catch him, or am I going to have to work a little harder for him today?
Right on. Now, as far as different techniques that you utilize on let's talk Lake Erie first. Yeah. Primarily, what's your go-to technique during the let's just say during the summer months?
Yeah. So go-to technique, I'm sure as you know, anywhere in the country is going to be a drop shot. That's on the deck for sure. Every time, no exceptions. But I love to crank on Erie as long as they're shallow enough to crank. And by shallow enough, I mean, if they're probably 20 feet or less, if I can find them, I love to crank Lake Erie. And I think that's probably one reason I prefer fishing Lake Erie. St. Clair has had a good crankbait bite in years past. The last probably 2 to 3 years has not been near as good as it was years prior to that. I don't know if that's fishing pressure or just a change in any number of things, some of the bait fish or whatever. But Lake Erie, usually has a good crankbait bite going somewhere. And so that's something that I'm always looking for, because I feel like I can exploit that pretty well. It's something that you can do, and you can make a couple casts and move on to another target. You don't need to sit there and just milk an area. So I love to throw a crankbait on Erie as often as I can. But you can't get away from drop shot out on Lake Erie either.
Okay. Run me through the perfect pattern for a crankbait. Like, what are you looking for? How do those fish have to set up? It sounds like you might be a run and gun approach. Yeah. So, even just the conditions on the water that day, what would be ideal for you to go and just fish a crankbait all day long?
Well, I would generally want a little bit of wind. You don't have to have wind, but I do like a little bit of wind just to break up that surface a little bit. A ton of wind can make it difficult to crank if there's 4 and 5 footers out there. That can make it really tough. But a little bit of wind is nice. It depends on kind of how they set up. I like to find little stretches of gravel and things like that, little patches of gravel. I've got some areas shallow on Lake Erie that have been created by wind action, and those are in 6 to 10 feet, where big waves have over years crashed into areas, and they make these kind of ditches. And it'll be a stretch of maybe 100 yards, 200 yards at the most of this little ditch with gravel, and they'll get down and sit in there. And if the wind's blowing right, and it's something that you can check really quick too, which is really nice. You can run that 100 yards, put the trolling motor on high, and if they're there, you'll get bit. So, and then there's other areas that a lot of guys probably would fish with a drop shot. Your typical, little humps, little breaks, something like that. The more and more I'm finding is how much smallmouth love flats though. They love flat areas, especially if there's some gravel involved. It's not that they don't get on humps. You still catch plenty of fish off of humps and breaks and stuff like that. But those seem to be, I find the bigger schools of fish seem to set up better on like gravel flats. So I'm looking for those kinds of things. And again, there are areas that a lot of guys will go through and throw a drop shot or drag something, but I'll come through there with a crankbait, and I can work the area quicker. And if one's there, I'm going to get it. And that tells me there's a school there. If there's only one fish there, I don't really care that much if I catch or not, because in that situation, I'm looking for a school of fish. So I'm not There's so many smallmouth, like you said earlier, there are so many smallmouth in this lakes. Lake St. Clair, Lake Erie, you fish a spot long enough, you will catch a smallmouth. But that's not what we're after. And especially in a tournament mindset, or we're practicing for a guiding mindset. So a crankbait allows me to work quickly through something. Looking for a lot of flats. Gravel flats is mostly what I'm looking for, adjacent to breaks and around breaks and humps, but I like those gravel flats.
Do those areas seem to change from year to year? Some of those flats, is there, or maybe just week to week?
I think a lot of it depends on the wind. Okay. I don't know that there's certain areas. I think it's bigger than that. I think the areas on Lake Erie hold fish on a year-to-year basis. There's an areas that I fished back in like 2010, 11, 12, 13 that of late have not been as productive. So it's more in a sense of it seems to change over like a 5-year span or so. It does change day to day, but it resets pretty quick. There was a tournament I fished, I think it was 2011. We had them dialed in. My buddy Chad Pifkins is a good friend of mine. We had them dialed in on the North Shore on Lake Erie. And the day before the tournament, it blew out of the southwest at like 25 to 30. We didn't even go out practice that day. It was so bad. So we make this long run in the morning to get out there. We get out there, it's chocolate milk. Like you can't see down like 5 inches, right? Ouch. Of course, didn't catch anything. We caught 1 or 2, but nothing that great. 2 days later, my buddy won the BFL tournament, and then he won a major team tournament off that same stuff.
Sure.
So the fish were there. They didn't go anywhere. They just kind of got freaked out by all the mud and all that business. As soon as it cleared out, they were ready to go. So I don't know that fish move so much on a day-to-day basis like that. Like it's not like they're just a school that big anyway. They're not here and gone, but over the course of a couple of years, they use frequent areas, and then they'll move to other areas. And that area still has fish. It just for whatever reason doesn't seem to have the same population of fish. So you just got to keep working around and find a new areas, and that's part of the fun too, though. So
yeah, absolutely. So can you walk me through your crankbait setup as far as rod, reel, line? And I'd love to pick your brain on maybe a couple top crankbaits that you prefer.
Yeah. So I try to keep it as simple as possible. I have a lot of tackle, but I don't have near as much as some guys have because I just don't like thinking about it that hard. I mean, I do like thinking about that, or we all do, but I try to keep it so that I'm focused on on finding the fish. My favorites, a couple of Lucky Craft crankbaits, like a CB20. That seems to be a really good bait that it knocks really hard. And I've caught a ton of fish on that bait. And I'll throw it as shallow as 10 feet sometimes, even though it's supposed to get down to 20-ish, and you just grind that along the bottom, and they really like that. And the profile's not too big either. Even for a deep diving bait, that CB20 is not too big. Catch a lot on a 5XD. We all know that's a fantastic bait. I catch a lot old school Norman deep little N. I mentioned before fishing those kind of ditches where the wave action gets created. Norman deep little N's good there. If it's clear, I like that. If it's a little bit dirtier, they don't make it anymore. It's a Lucky Craft. It was called a CBDR, which was kind of like a smaller version of the CB20. Again, just a real hard knocking bait. And I used to throw that deep little N almost exclusively. And then my brother kicked my butt one day in the back of the boat with that little Lucky Craft deal. I'm not sure that the crankbait matters that much. Couple of things that I do to them. One, I like shad colors. Two, the biggest thing I would say is upsizing the hooks. I found that even if I tangle once or twice throughout the day, it's worth having those big hooks. Those smallmouth they pull so hard, and they don't always eat the bait real well because they've got a small mouth, So having those slightly bigger hooks on the bait can help it wrap around when they're fighting. It'll wrap around and catch them on the underside of the jaw. And I've just found a better hookup percentage by upsizing the hooks. So that's something that's real important to me, is paying attention to my hooks on a crankbait. I throw pretty much all of them on a Dobbins 764 CB. It's the graphite glass composite. Gives me a real long cast. Still gives me some good feel too. I like to ground it on the bottom and feel it bouncing over things. And sometimes you can feel that extra big rock that might be worth another cast or two as you're moving by. I'm playing around with gear ratios. I used to always throw the 6, like a 5.4, like a slower one, but I've been playing around with some higher ones these days. And I haven't noticed a whole lot of difference just yet, but it's still definitely experimental phase. But I love cranking. It's something that I wish I got to do more of on Lake St. Clair, but I love doing it on Lake Erie.
Wow. Yeah, that gets me excited. I love a good crankbait bite. It's really interesting to hear your take on that. Standard like 10, 12 pound fluorocarbon? Is that
Yeah,
what we're going with?
Yeah, mostly. On St. Clair, I'll throw 10, sometimes 12. On Lake Erie, I actually throw a lot of 15 though, because like I was mentioning about that CB20. It's the Lightcraft CB20. It's meant to be a 20-foot diving crankbait. So think like a 6XD. I actually don't think they make the CB20 anymore, but you can find them on eBay. They're all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like a 6XD type bait. And I actually throw it on 15-pound a lot because Lake Erie does have a ton of rocks. Lots of zebra mussels, and so I feel a little bit better about that. So I might not be able, the deepest I can get it is probably about 15, 16 feet. But I'm fine with that because I like throwing it in that range and grinding it. So in that 15-pound, I have a little better feeling about that than I do throwing 12-pound around zebra mussels.
Okay. So it sounds like you want to make contact with the bottom. Have you ever found a time or do you target fish where you're not always on the bottom with that crankbait and still having success?
Yeah, definitely. And especially on Lake St. Clair. On Lake St. Clair, I don't even bother making contact with the bottom. I found it a little more on Lake Erie because the water in general is not quite as clear. So they can't see it quite as much. It depends on where you're at. Like I think the Eastern Basin's pretty clear, but over on the Western Basin, we get a lot of wind and wave action there. There's times when it's clear, but usually you have a little bit less visibility over on the Western end. So I tend to do more of grinding it on the bottom, but it definitely doesn't have to. And on Lake St. Clair, I don't even bother with it. On Lake St. Clair, I still throw it on 15-pound line on Lake St. Clair over 20 feet of water just so it doesn't hit the bottom.
Right. How about as far as the retrieve? Is it a steady retrieve or you stop and go?
Yeah, no, it's definitely stop and go. It's mixing it up. I'll wind it for a bit and then do a short pause. I don't pause it for long at all. It's just a quick stop. Other things I do is I've heard it called wagging the rod. So I'll wind it and then make a turn to the side so it kind of speeds it up, and then let it come back and then turn and then kind of pull to the other side so it kind of changes directions. Smallmouth will follow things and you just need something to trigger them, and sometimes that'll do it, that little change in direction or something like that. They'll just kind of track it. We've all seen it, right? Even beginners, you're out there throwing your jerk bait and there's a big old smallmouth behind it and he's just following it and making fun of you along the way, you know. So you got to do something that kind of triggers them sometimes. So I mix it up for sure. Yeah, steady retrieve. It's not that a steady retrieve doesn't work. You definitely can catch them on a steady retrieve. Sure. But sometimes mixing it up give you a little better edge.
Wow. No, this is great stuff when it comes to cranking for smallmouth. I mean, you've done a lot of damage with that setup in the past, and man, gets me excited. I want to go get a crankbait in my hand right now. Let's talk a little bit about St. Clair. Let's take a quick break, and we'll touch on St. Clair when we come back.
Sounds good.
You're listening to the SmallmouthCrush podcast. Don't rush out to the water just yet. We'll be right back after this break.
You ever wonder if your electronics are set up perfectly, or perhaps there's a specific technique that you just want to learn a little bit more about? Maybe you have a tournament coming up on a new body of water and you want a second pair of eyes on how to approach that. Maybe it's your home body of water and you want to go through some seasonal patterns. I'm offering a service called the SmallmouthCrush One-on-One. It's actually a web-based program, so we can meet virtually and I can answer any fishing-related question that you may have, any topics, any questions. We're going to go into detail, and then we're going to be able to record that conversation so you can have a copy of that and look over that in the future. It's a really neat program I'm excited to offer. And if you want to take advantage of this, all you have to do is head on over to my website, travismanson.com. Upper right-hand corner, you're going to find the link, SmallmouthCrush One-on-One. And it goes into detail as far as what that service has to offer. And I look forward to chatting with you.
We're back to the SmallmouthCrush podcast with your host, Travis Manson.
We're talking with Ryan Said today, and he just gave up a lot of good information when it comes to cranking. And I want to real touch base on as far as, let me do that whole thing. That was dumb. All right, we're back. We're talking with Ryan Said. He just went over some of his crankbait techniques when it comes to fishing on Lake Erie. I want to talk a little bit more about St. Clair, and I still want to get to some of these inland lakes because that fascinates me as well. But, you know, St. Clair, throwing a crankbait there, pretty much the same setup. What other techniques are you utilizing on St. Clair throughout the year?
Well, as I mentioned before, the drop shot, you don't leave the dock without the drop shot. And there's not a whole lot to that. Basically, I tell my client, I get a lot of beginning clients up here. There's a lot of people that I get that have either never fished before or fished very little or have not been out on the Great Lakes and have never fished a drop shot. And basically what I tell them is if it is on the bottom, you are not doing it wrong. And so just make sure it's out there and make sure it gets on the bottom. So the drop shot is a big one, but one that I enjoy more than the drop shot, I kind of get bored with the drop shot. I like really throwing a swim bait. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot of variety you can do with it. A lot of different things a lot of different kinds of forage you can mimic with a swim bait. So I've really gotten into that and really dialed that in. I would say, 10 years ago, a crankbait was the thing that I loved the most. And I still do love it probably the most, but I've had to adapt. Like I mentioned, the crankbait bite on St. Clair hasn't been quite what it is, but I've adapted with swim baits and they seem to enjoy it. And I like throwing it. So it's a win-win situation.
Now these swim baits, are you just swimming it through the water column? Are you dragging it? A little bit of both?
Yeah, a little bit of both. It depends on the time of year. It depends on the bait in the area. It depends on what we're noticing on the graph as far as how the bait's setting up. A lot of it, I would say, is not so much dragging it, but I fish it within the 3 feet of the bottom. So I'll let it. I always let it go to the bottom. First cast, it's got to go to the bottom. On first fall, I should say, it's got to go to the bottom because a lot of fish, I would say, of the bites that I get on a swim bait, 20% of them happen on that initial fall. And that's another thing I tell my clients, whether it doesn't matter what you're fishing on Lake St. Clair, you're fishing a Ned rig, a drop shot swim bait, make sure it gets to the bottom on that initial fall. On a slack line too. They really seem to prefer that. After that, it's more of just, I kind of like wind it along the bottom a little bit. I feel something, I'll snap it off the bottom a little bit. It's a lot of kind of what we're talking about with the crankbait, a lot of stop and go, a lot of triggering them. Most of the time I'm fishing it probably within the bottom 3 to 4 feet, within 3 to 4 feet of the bottom. But there's times, depending on the water clarity, where I'm noticing bait fish at, where I will swim it a little bit higher in the water column.
As far as size goes, there's so many different brands and sizes of plastic swim baits out there. Sometimes a lot of people, I know myself included, get used to one particular size and that's kind of our go-to. Is that the case with you, or do you like to switch things up a little bit?
I don't, kind of like what I was saying with the crankbaits. I like to pick something. I don't. Smallmouth it's tough figuring them out sometimes, but if you find them, you can usually get them to eat. And I don't really spend a lot of time playing around with a lot of different baits until I get bit. Because if you're around the fish that you need to be around, one of them is going to bite. They just don't care that much. I really don't believe that. Mm-hmm. And so I mostly throw a 3.3 and a 3.8. Striking Rage Swimmer, Kitech, the Fat Impact. Pretty much stick to that until I get bit. And once we get bit, then I'll play around with some colors. Maybe play around with some size. If I happen to notice, we catch one and it spits up a big old giant perch, maybe we'll jump it up to the 4.8 or something like that. If it's spitting up a lot of really tiny ones, then we can drop down to a 2.8 or something like that. But most of the time, 90% of the time, either the 3.3, I like the 3.3 a little bit earlier in the year when it's colder. They seem to prefer that a little more, but as it gets warmer, the 3.8. And I would say I throw the 3.8 probably 70% of the time and the 3.3 about 30% of the time. So, and that's about it. I'll mix it up on sizes, a 1/4 ounce, 3/8 ounce. And once the summer gets here, I throw a lot of 1/2 ounce. Again, just it's easier to make that reaction thing happen. I throw a little bit of a unique head on them. It's not sponsored by them, but Freedom Tackle makes this kind of, it's made for swim baits, but I put like a light wire flipping hook on it. So it kind of is like a jig head essentially, but I really like that 1/2 ounce because a lot of times on a 1/2 ounce baits, I've found they have these massive hooks for one thing, 1/2 ounce head. And then two, the fish have a lot of leverage when you have a 1/2 ounce and they can shake that in. But with this Freedom Tackle, you can put any hook you want on it. It's got a real natural swim bait head. You can put any hook you want on it. So they have less leverage because the hook's not direct. It's attached to the head, but they're still swinging. And then I can put a light wire flipping hook on it and still get a real nice light wire. It's a small, like a 1/0 light wire flipping hook, and I get everything I want out of that package. So I don't lose as many fish that way. I feel like anyway. Sure. And so that's probably the package I throw the most.
Okay. No, that's great. As far as colors, if you could pick two Are you bait fish oriented or perch, or what are you looking at as far as some of your top colors if you're going to throw a swim bait?
I would say number one is the Smalley Magic color from Kitech. The striking one is kind of similar to KVD Magic, but something in that natural bait fish hue is probably what I throw the most of. Probably 70-80% of the time that's what's tied on. Put a little chartreuse in the tail. They seem to like that. I don't dunk it in the chartreuse. Just a little bit of an accent. It seems to be enough. It's just something, if they swim up behind it, it gives them a little more incentive. Beyond that, I don't know that I would have a solid number 2 color. I would say I throw even more natural bait fish color like electric shad, which is like a very light smoke with some purple-ish in it. Or I have caught them pretty well on like a fire tiger, like a super bright chartreuse one too. I throw that. That's usually in the boat at some point. But most of the time, that Smalley Magic, that natural bait fish, some greenish blue on the top and some kind of like a lighter silvery white on the bottom is mostly what gets the job done for me.
Right on. So let's talk a little bit about these inland lakes. So, you got so much good fishing on the Great Lakes and Lake Erie and St. Clair. It must be pretty good in some inland lakes up in Michigan too. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so it depends on where you go. Michigan has a wide variety of inland lakes. So down in southeast Michigan, we have a lot of, we call them kind of pothole lakes. The biggest one is maybe 1,000 acres, but we've got a couple of big rivers down here, and they've got some impoundments on them, and then you've got kind of watersheds and things like that. So those are a lot of fun to fish. I would not say it's near as good as fishing as on the Great Lakes. But what it is for me a chance to get away from the smallmouth for just a little bit and go back and fish some largemouth.
Sure.
A lot of grass beds and deep weed edges. You can go flip a jig, throw some pop bar in the morning, something like that. So that's what I really enjoy about Southeast Michigan lakes. And most of them are pretty clean. They've got real good weeds and stuff like that. You're not going to catch the numbers on there usually. I mean, sometimes you do, but like you do consistently on Lake St. Clair. But it's just a lot of fun. They do get a little bit nuts on the weekends, so I don't really bother with them on the weekends. It's mostly something I hit during the weekdays. Michigan, I don't know where it is now, but I know a couple of years ago they were like number 3 in the country in terms of privately owned boats, right? And we don't live by the ocean, so all these boats are on these inland lakes, and it gets a little nuts. But it's a good way. It's a good way to take a little break from the smallmouth action and get back to some hardcore largemouth fishing. And it's also a great place. Like I said, I like to take high schoolers out there to teach them how to do the basics of tournament fishing and strategy and things like that. Now, there's other places in Michigan, if you get up north and out on the west side of the state, where you do have the quality of fishing that you do on the Great Lakes. I'm sure if you watch Mark Zona's show, he's been up on some of those lakes. You've probably seen him in Bassmaster Magazine. Burton Mullet Lakes, they have fantastic smallmouth fishing up there. Those lakes are bigger. Those are on the order of 15, 20,000 acres, some of them. So those are pretty good sized lakes. And those always take 20 plus pounds to win a tournament. Whereas on our Southeast Michigan lakes, you're talking like 13, 15. A really good bag might be 18 pounds or something like that. Everybody's catching fish, but the size isn't quite there in Southeast Michigan in the lakes that there is over on the west side and up in the north.
Do you get to get out there a lot for those bigger smallmouth in the inland bodies of water?
Not as much as I would like. I used to more because a lot of the tournament trails would go up there to Burton Mullet Lakes, which are all the way at the top of Michigan. And then over on the west side, you have Muskegon Lake, you have White Lake. And so a lot of the tournaments go there. What's neat about those lakes on the west side of Michigan is that you can go out into Lake Michigan and get up into the different lakes. So there's the Grand River, there's Muskegon Lake, White Lake, there's Manistee, there's a whole bunch of lakes, and it's kind of a neat experience to go out one lake and then go up into these other lakes. And then, you're traveling on Lake Michigan in a bass boat and all that. So it's kind of neat. I have fished them all. I don't get to as much guiding because, again, my clientele mostly wants to fish Lake St. Clair, but I have done some guide trips up north in Michigan too. And so whenever that's an opportunity, I really enjoy doing that. The only one I haven't been to, Traverse Bay, is a huge one up there that I haven't had the chance to get to. There is a lot of guiding that happens up there. I got a friend that guides up there as well. That's one that's on my list that I just haven't made it to yet, but I'd really like to.
Right. So obviously you have a lot of experience on Erie, St. Clair. You fished all over the country. Have you explored some of the other, amazing bodies of water, whether it be in upstate New York or Wisconsin, Minnesota? Have you had any run-ins with big smallmouth on those bodies of water?
Yeah, definitely. So I fished the St. Lawrence which is an awesome fishery. I know you won a big tournament there a couple years ago. Fished Lake Champlain as well. Really enjoyed fishing there. Finished second there. I think you finished, what is it? We were both in the top 10 on that one. And Champlain 2010.
Yep.
I think third, maybe something like that right there. And we were both catching smallmouth, and we got beat by Dave Wolak catching largemouth, I think it was. But yeah, so Lake Champlain is a fantastic place. St. Lawrence River, I mean, probably St. Clair to St. Lawrence River, probably your toss up for the best smallmouth, I think, fishing in the country right now. I've caught some really big smallmouth on the St. Lawrence River. That's a fun place to fish. And what's kind of cool about that place is the variety that's there. You go out in the big lake on Lake Ontario, you can stay in the river, so I really enjoyed fishing there. When I've been there twice, and I really enjoyed fishing there as well.
Do you feel it sets up like home for you, or is it a little bit different?
I feel like it sets up Lake Erie. It doesn't set up like Lake St. Clair that I found. But I do feel like it sets up Lake Erie with the structure and a little more precision, which is why I really enjoyed fishing there. When I fished there the first day of the tournament, I ran out into the lake. The second and third days, I think I stayed in the river. That was back. It was a 4-day tournament when the ever starts were 4 days. So we fished for 3 days, and then championship it was on the 4th day. So I spent a day out in the lake, and I actually ran out there on the second day as well. And it just had some real nice rock piles, some flats, little things where you can be precise, where if you're paying attention to what you're doing, you can figure out just a little something extra to kind of dial them in a little bit. And I appreciate that about a fishery like that.
Sure. Yeah, it's amazing fishing in any of those bodies of water. How about Lake Huron? That's not too far from you. Have you been able to get up there at all?
So I have fished Saginaw Bay. Saginaw Bay, Michigan's shaped like a thumb. That big gap between the thumb and the forefinger of Michigan is Saginaw Bay, and that's Lake Huron. And I fished out there, and yeah, again, that's an amazing fishery. I've been out there twice. Again, with guiding, clients want to fish Lake St. Clair. That's where we end up most of our time. But Lake Huron, awesome fishery. The summer, they tend to disperse a little bit more on that part of Lake Huron anyway. I haven't really fished up in the Thunder Bay area too much or anything like that. But Saginaw Bay's got some fantastic, and it's a lot of fun too, because there's some tournaments up there, but it doesn't seem near the pressure that Lake Clair does.
I was gonna say how far is that for a drive for you? Only maybe 2-3 hours?
Yeah, not even. Probably about 2 hours.
Oh, nice.
Probably about 2 hours to get up there. So
sure. Well, I always ask a couple key questions with all of our guests here on the podcast, because I find it fascinating, and I want to learn a little bit about your biggest personal best smallmouth and kind of the conditions that surround that. Before we get to that, though, I want to know, if you had only one bait to use the rest of your life. Well, let's not go that far. Just for next year, okay? Sure. What would it be?
So I'm definitely the technique I enjoy the most is cranking. But if we're talking, I got to put some fish in the boat, it's going to be a swim bait, and still have a good time. So for me, a drop shot probably puts the most fish in the boat. A crankbait's my favorite thing. Swim bait's kind of in the middle there. So if you're telling me I got to have a good time and catch fish, I'm going to probably pick up a swim bait, because I feel like that's going to catch me the most fish, and I'm still going to really enjoy what I'm doing. It's not that I don't. I mean, we all love catching fish, right? So it's not that I don't enjoy fishing a drop shot. I just enjoy doing a little bit more work on my part, the moving the bait and trying to trigger the fish, and they hit it hard, So I would probably pick up a Kitech or a Strike King Rage Swimmer 3.8, some kind of natural color like Smallmouth Magic or KVD Magic.
I was gonna say,
yeah. Put a half-ounce head on it, little chartreuse in the tail, and go to work all year long. And I'd catch anything I'd catch on that I'd be happy with.
Right, no doubt. So talk about your personal best. How big was your personal best smallmouth?
So I haven't broken 7 yet. I've got a 612. That's the biggest that I've ever caught. Caught it a couple of years ago. I was out with my dad. It was a relatively calm day. It wasn't a lot of wind, but I was still cranking out there. I was actually, there was an area, Lake St. Clair, that was really good. I don't know, probably about the like 2008, 2009-ish. And it kind of had gone away a little bit. I'd catch some fish here and there. And I was like, Dad, we haven't hit this spot in a long time. Let's go out there. Let's go check this. We rolled in there, and we didn't catch a ton there, but I lost a giant right off the bat, throwing a crankbait, just launching it. Cause I like to do that a lot when I'm approaching new areas as well, as fish a crankbait, because you can draw some strikes. And again, I'm not fishing Lake St. Clair, Lake Erie, I'm not looking for one fish. I'm looking for a school of fish. And if you're throwing a crankbait and you've got a school down there, one of them is going to come and at least give you a little tap, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I was throwing a crankbait, kind of exploring this area that I hadn't fished in a while, and I lost a monster. And I saw it way out there. And I just kind of looked at my dad. I'm like, that was a big fish. And so we stayed in the area for a little longer. And then probably within 5 minutes, I hooked another one. And I didn't even like just yelling at my dad, get the net, get up here, you know, and caught it on a DD22 kind of, it's a color called Tennessee shad, but it actually, in my mind, looks more like a perch. It's got a lot of yellow in it. It's got some green fleck in it, kind of white on the belly. So like I said, it's called Tennessee shad, but I think it looks more like a perch than a shad. But yeah, I was cranking a big old DD22. It was a 612 smallmouth. And, yeah, it was, I'm really happy that my biggest fish ever came on a crankbait because, you know.
No, that's pretty cool. DD22.
Yeah, old school.
Yeah, crazy. Wow, this has been a lot of really good information, Ryan. I certainly appreciate you stopping by today for the podcast. You know, if people want to follow you, what's the best way as far as contacting you on social media? And is there any sponsors, anyone you want to talk about?
Yeah, sure. So I'm affiliated with Dobbins Rods and Blackfish. They're kind of a relatively new clothing line, rain gear, all that really good stuff. They were in the ice fishing market first, so you know they've got some warm stuff. So I really appreciate about them. I've been able to join up with them the last couple of years. Lose reels, Costa sunglasses. I've been using those forever. They're amazing. P-Line. So iBass 360 as well. They're not necessarily a sponsor, but affiliated with them. They're growing their network over on the East Coast and then all around the country. Just lots of good fishing info from iBass 360. My social media, I'm on Instagram at rsaid19fish, so RSAID19FISH. And then I'm on on Facebook as well. Facebook.com/Ryan Said Fish, and lots of fish pictures there, lots of pictures of my dog, you know.
Right. A little bit of everything.
Yeah.
If someone's looking to book a trip with you, what's the best way to do that?
So they can direct message me on Facebook or Instagram. Either of those work as well, or if they want to check out marcelsguideservice.com. That's my buddy that I work through. He handles all of our booking and things like that. So you can look up his website. It's got the phone number on there, and they can go that way as well.
Perfect. Man, we'll have all this information in the description here on the podcast as well as on the YouTube channel. Ryan, thank you for hanging out with me today. I learned a lot. I'm excited. I want to get that crankbait in my hand, man. I get fired up about techniques that are a little bit sometimes different. You know, we all get set in our own ways. I think this is the biggest takeaway, at least for me during this interview was, you know, we're so used to throwing certain baits and techniques. Man, I got to get a crankbait in my hand more often and have a little bit of fun with that.
Yeah, for sure. It's it's hard to put it down once you get a bite or two. Like, I mean, generally with my clients, like I talk them into fishing a drop shot and they get bit, and then I never pick it up the rest of the day. I throw crankbaits and swimbaits the rest of the day because it's just so much more fun in my mind. I'd rather catch 5 on a crankbait than 10 on a drop shot. You know, it's just a lot more fun.
Sure, no doubt. Well, thanks for hanging out with us, everybody. Thank you, Ryan.
No problem. Thank you.
And as always, until next time, we'll see you guys on the water.
See ya.
Thanks so much for listening today. Make sure that you're subscribed to the show and follow us on Instagram at SmallmouthCrush. Also, the YouTube channel, SmallmouthCrush. And if you feel so inclined, please leave us a 5-star rating and comment with a review below. And as always, until next time, we'll see you on the water.